Okay, thank you very much, and good afternoon to everyone, and welcome to today's seminar or webinar on democracy in trouble, Tanzania's 2025 general elections. And I'm going to be the moderator. My name is Dr. Nicodemus Minde. I'm a researcher with the Institute for Security Studies, and I'll be moderating this discussion where we are going to unpack the challenges, risks, opportunities for democracy in Tanzania ahead of the 29th October polls. Of course, in terms of a bit of a context, we know that the general elections in Tanzania are taking place under tense political, institutional circumstances. We have seen the disqualification of key opposition figures, parties, that is CHADEMA and ACT-Wazalendo, which has made this election arguably the least competitive since the introduction of multi-party politics in 1992. So we are going to discuss the dynamics and, of course, how the elections is going to be shaped, and also looking at the prospects for peace, security, and stability, where we are going to be really drawing lessons from the wider region, that is East Africa, Southern Africa, and beyond. And I will now pause and ask my IT colleague to begin, and to just if there are any rules you can tell us before we can begin. If not, then I will then proceed to introduce my panelists, my able panelists. So I'm joined with by four distinguished discussants. And we have Mary Ndaro, who is a seasoned gender justice activist from Dar es Salaam. And we're also joined by Deus Valentine, who is the CEO of the Center for Strategic Litigation. And we're also joined by our colleague, ISS colleague, Borges Nhamirre, who is a research consultant at the Institute for Security Studies. And then finally, we have Dr. Richard Mbunda, who is a lecturer in politics at the University of Dar es Salaam. But before we begin, I think it'll be important for me to just give a bit of a context in terms of setting the agenda. And this is based from a situation report that the Institute for Security Studies under the East Africa Peace and Security and Governance Project has been able to carry out. And we came up with some sort of findings from a field study that was carried out in Tanzania. And I'm going to share with you some of the findings. Okay, so correct. I hope you can be able to see my screen. Of course, our seminar is Democracy in Trouble, Tanzania's 2025 general elections. But I think it is also important for me to just give some form of a background and introduction to the elections. Tanzania will hold its general elections on the 29th of October. That is in 2 weeks' time. And this will be the 7th general election since the return of multi-party politics in 1992. The first multi-party elections were held in 1995, and of course the ruling party, Chama Cha Mapinduzi, has won all the elections, which makes it one of Africa's longest-serving independence parties. So the general elections, in terms of the broader electoral context, will include the presidential, parliamentary, ward-level elections in mainland Tanzania and Zanzibar, which is Tanzania's semi-autonomous region. In terms of a broader political context ahead of the election, we know that this election will be the first under President Samia Suluhu Hassan, who inherited the seat following the death of President John Magufuli, who died in March 2021. We saw that she initiated reforms that were radical departure from those of her predecessor. But she has since backtracked on these reforms. We're going to really unpack why this is the case. So the political landscape going into the election remains sharply polarized, with opposition leaders facing legal harassment and civic space that has been constrained. In terms of the core findings from the report, which we can find in our website, Stifling Democracy Scenarios for the 2025 Elections, you can see the policy brief there with some sort of pictorials in terms of a chart. But these are the core findings that we came up with. Number one from the study is democratic backsliding and authoritarian consolidation is still evident, where we see systems dominance continues. And one of the key findings we found is that internal party democracy has weakened. And we saw President Samia's early nomination was judged to have contravened party norms, which shows a decline in intra-party democracy, which has an effect in the general political landscape of the country. We have also seen that there is the exclusion of the opposition. The two main parties, opposition parties, ACT-Wazalendo and CHADEMA, have been disqualified. You might argue that CHADEMA was not disqualified, but has taken a position which we're going to unpack. And what does this really mean? We foresee probably voter apathy likely, and turnout may actually drop. From the responses we are seeing, it might actually go below 50, but we are going to unpack that. In terms of institutional credibility, we saw some form of electoral reforms or new electoral laws, but despite these new electoral laws, they create which created the independent National Electoral Commission, the executive still controls the key institution. And then also we see that presidential results remain non-adjustable despite African court rulings. But again, it will be very important to look at Zanzibar as a risk, where we see the Kura Mapema, which is early voting, which we pretend could be a potential flashpoint, and the absence of a reconciliatory figure in the name of Saif Sharif Ahmad, who was the opposition figure, a very reconciliatory historical figure. His absence increases the potentials for these tensions. And lastly, we see the issues of civic space and information control. Again, the electoral and political environment still sees a lot of restrictive laws, media censorship persists, civil societies constraint media, and the like. And for now, we look at the possible scenarios. The first one is managed stability, where we see international and regional observers would, look at, talk about anomalies, but they might refrain from categorical condemnation, where we see CCM wins amid these anomalies and a landslide. And of course, probably we are going to see pockets of violence and questions about CCM's legitimacy, but we see status quo prevailing. In terms of Zanzibar flashpoints, we see security crackdown might heighten tensions, causing unrest, especially in a historical place like Zanzibar, Pemba, which has experienced violence in the past. But also see a situation of high security presence in both Zanzibar and on the mainland, which makes protest highly unlikely, or if they proceed, it might really be chaotic. In terms of also the third scenario is suppressed contestation, where we see disqualified opposition, parties which can lead to induced apathy and voter turnout, protests stifled, consolidating authoritarian rule. And then we also see another scenario could be external intervention pressures, where Western powers, European Union, the United States, or even regional organizations such as the ESC, the African Union, denounce serious irregularities. Although CCM retains power, regional mediation efforts may necessitate some form of post-election reform or dialogue. So these findings raise questions about Tanzania's democratic future. And again, in the broader context, we see that the East African region is in an election season. We saw elections in Rwanda in 2024, parliamentary elections in Burundi this year, Tanzania elections this year, Uganda elections in early 2026, Somalia in 2026, and then Kenya in 2027. So what do these elections mean for Tanzania and the region? And this regional decline in democracy and a slide to authoritarian consolidation, of course, we can see some form of a trend. So to help us unpack this, I welcome our distinguished panelists. to help us understand and dig more into the broader context of the elections. And I'm going to begin with Deus. Based on this background, I will just want to hear your assessment of Tanzania's political landscape going into the elections, and why do these elections matter, and why should the region and the world pay attention? Welcome, Deus.
Thank you very much, Nico, and thanks for that overview on the electoral context in Tanzania. I think it is quite succinct and reflective of the reality on the ground. Maybe to go straight to your question on what these elections mean and why they matter, I think anyone who's been studying Tanzania's political history must realize that this is a country that is going through a pretty disturbed democratic puberty, is what I would call it, with all the acne and everything that comes at that age. Tanzania has been on this democratic experiment for a long time, and I think sometimes we forget that part of Tanzania's history. I think prior to independence, Tanzania was a multi-party state. In the first 3 elections, in 58, in 1960, in 61, Tanzania went into those elections as a multi-party state. One of the key differences, of course, was at that stage, part of that opposition came from TANU itself, the ruling party, after the disagreements in 58 around the rights to participation across races. By 1960, there were only TANU MPs in Tanganyika's legislature, with one independent candidate from, I think, Mbulu in northeast Tanzania. The idea of having a multi-party state was in a way clouded by the fact that there was one party, the United Tanganyika Party, that had the backing of primarily the white settlers in the country. And what most of the TANU followers and leaders at that point had crowned them to be was simply, an imperialist stooge. So it wasn't fancy in the early 60s to belong to the opposition. And there was a lot of harassment among those who belonged to a party alternative to the TANU. And as part of that continued harassment, by 1962 or thereabouts, Mwalimu, who was at this stage already president of Tanganyika, began to toy with the idea of getting rid of these other parties and keeping only the TANU party. And within TANU, the justification was, these other parties don't even matter to begin with. They can't even win a seat in parliament, so why must we have them in the first place? And then we had a scarecrow in the shape of the Congo, where, as many know, there was political trouble there, and Lumumba was assassinated. And that again was used as an excuse to say, we cannot have multi-parties in Tanzania because, they will lead us into the same kind of trouble Congo has gone through. And by 63, Mwalimu appoints his Prime Minister Rashid Kawawa to lead a commission to come up with these proposals about transitioning into a one-party state. I think for me, there was already a foregone conclusion. And the stigma that those who belonged to other parties than TANU at this stage, I don't think it has completely washed away from Tanzania's political class. It took about 20 years before we saw some political insurgency with people agitating for multi-parties. Those who know Tanzania's history recall in 69, in 64, there was the mutiny. In 67, Mwalimu had made it very clear the kind of socialism he believed in. By 69, those within TANU who had disagreed with Mwalimu were facing treason charges. So even some of these things we're seeing now are not unique to the present moment. By the end of the Ugandan war, it had become clear that, assuming superstitiously rather, that a country as big as Tanzania can survive on a one-party setting is simply unrealistic. And in 82, we had the coup attempt, as some of you would recall. By 1983, Mwalimu had started to shift his mind and assigned his Attorney General then, Joseph Warioba, to start a process of reviewing Tanzania's constitution with 5 terms of reference, primarily looking at how to strengthen parliamentary supremacy, because in 1975, somebody who was too smart had made the suggestion through a legislation in Parliament, Act number 8 of 1975, that essentially subjected all the institutions of the state under the party. So it was not enough to get rid of other parties. It got to a point where essentially the institutions of governance had been, in a way, almost bastardized by being subjected to the party. So Parliament was essentially a committee of the ruling party. This is what Tanzania has been recovering from since 92. In 1990, by 1990, I think, because of the agitation led by the Tanganyika Law Society during the 1983 process, and of course the University of Dar es Salaam, those who recall Mapalala and others who were agitating for multipartism, they took advantage of the process that Mwalimu had initiated in 1983 to actually agitate for multipartism. And at the Institute for Finance Management in Dar es Salaam, the Tanganyika Law Society hosted a national seminar to discuss the matter. Some concessions were made. We didn't get multi-parties in 1983 or 84 when finally the constitutional amendments were made, the 8th constitutional amendments. But the concession that was made was for us to get a Bill of Rights in exchange to giving up on the multi-party ambitions. Of course, folks did not give up. The Tanganyika Law Society did not give up. Chakiwata, the teachers' union, did not give up, and the University of Dar es Salaam did not give up. These conversations continued all the way to 1990, when it seems something happened in the party and they started having and hosting conversations about multipartism. A series of seminars in 1990 eventually led to the suggestion by then President Mwinyi to kickstart a national process. In 1990, it was a party process. 1991, President Mwinyi appoints the then Chief Justice Francis Nyalali to lead a national conversation on deciding whether or not Tanzania should stay a monoparty state. We all know the statistics. 23% of Tanzanians wanted multipartism. A little, about 77% wanted to stay a monoparty state because of the scaremongering that I've referred to very early on. But if you look at Nyalali's 3rd book, which outlines the justifications for all the recommendations made, including the recommendation to transition into a multi-party state, was that many of the governance reforms that had been suggested by the population then could only be enforced in a multi-party state, not in a monoparty polity. So the reforms that were adopted during the ruling party's National Executive Council meeting in February 1992 were, I would say, not necessarily wholeheartedly embraced. In fact, there were a majority within the ruling party who did not necessarily sign up to the idea. It took Mwalimu's personal initiative to move the party towards adopting this new political culture. And the 2 main speakers at that meeting were Mwalimu and Salmin Amour from Zanzibar. There was certainly a hesitation, and we saw it in 1995, our first multi-party elections. the former Deputy Prime Minister Mrema had defected from the ruling party. At that stage, one of the reasons I understand the ruling party had accepted embracing these reforms was the sheer belief that if there was ever going to be an opposition, it would have come from the party itself, and therefore it would have been manageable. And indeed, those who recall our history, that was around the time we had the G55. There was a much stronger opposition within the party even than outside the party. And the party had managed, had found a way to contain it. And the belief was that, even when you had someone as strong as a candidate as Augustine Mrema, they would still find a way to manage. So the ruling party in Tanzania never really had to worry so much about the opposition because these were more or less their own people. And by 2000, after our second multi-party elections, we saw an interesting development, and I should underscore this. Benjamin Mkapa, who had come in on almost shaky ground in 1995 and won the election primarily because of the backing of President Nhamirre, had actually managed to improve his own score in that election from about 61% to 71%. And it is something that has never happened in Tanzania after that. He's the only incumbent president who managed to improve his score in the ballot.
Someone would argue Magufuli would have moved from 58 to 85. But just for, to cut you short, we wanted to understand, like, what do this region, this election, what do they really mean in terms of the current elections, and why should the world pay attention? Very briefly, yes.
Okay, thanks for your intervention. So let me just very quickly then. I wanted to underscore that because I want to insist on one of the observations you made about authoritarian consolidation of the party. I'm not very sure that the party is actually consolidating. My opinion is that the party is anything but consolidating at the moment. We saw moments in history when the party actually consolidated, and that is that period that I was referring to between 95 and 2005, when President Kikwete came in for his first term, being the most popular CCM candidate. I'm sorry, I cannot refer to the example of the President Magufuli's election because I would need to suffer from serious amnesia to pretend that that was a serious election worth making reference to. And that indeed, if we were to do an independent polling, President Magufuli managed to increase his support from 58% to 82%. I don't think even the late President Magufuli actually believes his own popularity improved by almost 30 percentage points. I think the improvement is unbelievable in its own right, and it wouldn't make much sense to refer to it now. Now, this election is important because Tanzania holds a very special place in the history of the Great Lakes region. For the longest time, Tanzania has been the harbinger of peace in this region. Elections never really were a problem. In the 90s and early 2000s, the only problem we had to worry about when it came to Tanzanian elections is, videos all over television of what was happening in Rwanda and Burundi, and that was enough to scare us from voting for the opposition. But I think we're dealing with a different generation now, a generation that doesn't necessarily connect to that history, a generation that is organizing in ways that we are all not used to. These are not necessarily NGO people. They're not necessarily organized around trade unions, but young people organizing on TikTok, which I struggle to follow myself. And I think the state is struggling with how to manage, that kind of a generation, because you see, these people have no nostalgia of Mwalimu or any of that history. Second, I want to point out that these elections are happening at a period where Tanzania's neighbors are facing political trouble in the eastern DRC, northern Mozambique. What is interesting about both crises is Tanzania's contribution to those crises. And those who have studied the Islamic State in Mozambique and some of the rebel groups in the Eastern DRC, you realize that the lingua franca there is actually Kiswahili, partly because Tanzania has been feeding these insurgent groups with its own population for some time. So that, I think, for me, is a worrying trend. The fact that Tanzania has contributed to insurgency in the region, and the kind of insurgency that has been impossible to happen in Tanzania because of our relative peace and stability. The fact that we are dealing with an extremely youthful generation that organizes in ways that we are not very used to, none of us are used to, making it very unpredictable. The fact that the opposition is almost completely nurtured at this point in time, which means that we are dealing with an opposition we are not used to. As you rightly pointed out, the two major opposition parties have had their candidates disqualified. So it's even hard to tell. So who is the ruling party actually competing against? I think this is going to be a vote, not necessarily about, the ruling CCM and the 16 other parties or 17 other parties involved. This is going to be a vote about how we do politics in Tanzania going forward. Whatever happens on October 29th, I think a new chapter is about to be opened in this country's political history.
Thank you very much, Deus, for that. You have really unpacked the historical, where we got here, and the current dynamics and why this election should matter, especially around the region. But now I want to bring in Richard for the sake of our global audience and those who might not really understand Tanzania's political context, of which Deus has been able to unpack a little bit. But probably some will not want to understand very briefly Tanzania's political context and the union dynamics. Most of the time they always ask what could be this relationship between Tanzania or Tanganyika and Zanzibar, very briefly before we can engage into the electoral dynamics.
Thank you so much, Nicodemus. I'm glad to be a part of this panel. Well, when we talk about Tanzania, we are referring to the United Republic, which was established in April 1964. So before Tanzania, we had Tanganyika, which got her independence in 1961. And a few years later, and that was December 1963, Tanganyika got her independence from the British colonial master. But unfortunately, the political history in Zanzibar did not render that independence to be legitimate because of the ethnic and political tensions that existed between the parties there, because we had Arab-based Zanzibar Nationalist Party, which actually teamed up with the Zanzibar and Pemba People's Party against the Afro-Shiraz Party. So the ZNP was an Arab-based Zanzibar and Pemba People's Party, was actually a Shiraz party, but those who felt that they were more close to Arabs than to the Africans. And the Afro-Shiraz party was initially, formed because of the union between the African Association and the Shiraz Association. So it was composed of Africans and the Shiraz who felt that they were closer to the African contingent. So after the independence, that was December 10th, 1963, only 3 months later, a revolution was carried out in Zanzibar. Of course, there are so many narratives as to who actually were the agents of the revolution. Names are mentioned, such as Okero and others. But at the end of the day, it is the Afro-Shiraz party that took over the rule in Zanzibar. And because of three reasons, basically, many reasons are mentioned, but three most important reasons. Fear of counter-revolution, the Afro-Shiraz party under President Abeid Aman Karume, sought to unite with Tanganyika. But the other reason was basically Nhamirre's fear. He feared that the islands, that is Pemba and Unguja, could be chaotic and could, the chaos could bring, like a lapse to the mainland. And of course, narratives also talk about external actors such as the United States of America. They had their own worries, particularly because it was during the Cold War era, and they thought maybe Zanzibar could be, another Cuba in the East African coast. Now, that is briefly about how the union came about. So I said it was on 26 April 1964 when Tanganyika and Zanzibar united to form Tanzania. Now, with regard to the topic under our discussion, I think two issues are important. First, the union itself is very much contested, and you can see, the contestation coming up now and then, particularly when we discuss about the constitution. For example, when the Warioba's draft constitution, there were proposals for, reforming the structure of the government, because currently we have a two-government structure. One is a union government, and the other one is the Zanzibar government. So the union government deals with matters of the union and matters that are relevant to Tanganyika, while the Zanzibar government, deals with matters that are, unique to the Zanzibar Islands. Now, there have been complaints, particularly from Zanzibar. They do not like such an arrangement because they think that Tanganyika is actually acting as a union government. And when it comes to negotiations between the two partner states, because they were all sovereign states when they established the union, they don't see Tanganyika who they can discuss with when there are, issues of contestations or, there are challenges. So they are actually calling for establishment of the Tanganyika government so that the structure of the union could shift to being a two-government structure to a three-government structure. But one other important thing is that matters of the union have been increasing from 11, now there are 22. So basically, it is also a complaint from Zanzibar, because the Zanzibaris think that they are being swallowed by the union because of the, many issues that now become, union matters. And one of the matters of the union is about registration of political parties. And therefore, it is illegal, for a political party to be registered and to operate only on one part of the union, either it is Zanzibar or mainland Tanzania. And now the biggest problem basically here is that when it was from 1977 when there was a merger between TANU, Tanganyika African Union, and ASP in Zanzibar. They formed Chama Cha Mapinduzi, which is the ruling party now. And of course, it was a time of one-party system. And the problem currently is that Chama Cha Mapinduzi has been established, has established itself as a dominant party, both in the Union and in the Zanzibar. And what is being actually contested is that CCM has, prevented, other parties from, taking power in Zanzibar.
Then
I can
summarize
give,
in 30 seconds.
yeah, just a summary because I'm finishing. It was 2015 in that election in Zanzibar when, all the stakeholders, including election observers, they attested that actually the Civic United Front has won the presidential election in Zanzibar. And of course, what we were waiting for was the Zanzibar Electoral Commission to announce the victor, which was Maalim Seif. But unfortunately, they decided to, cancel the election. They don't have the mandate to do so, but they are protected by the Constitution because their actions cannot be petitioned before any court in Zanzibar or even in the Union setting. So basically, in brief, this is what we can see about Zanzibar and Tanganyika and the dynamics of the Union.
Thank you very much, Richard, for unpacking that, especially for our global audience to really understand the uniqueness or the dynamics of the union. And so both Richard and Deus have really pointed like a grim picture of the country. But I want to bring in Mary and probably hear your take around the main issues around these elections. There are many issues we have heard from Deus, disqualification of candidates. Opposition party talks about no reforms, no election. There are many issues to do with human rights, democracy. Maybe you want to speak to these issues, but are there any silver linings going into these elections, Mary?
Oh, thank you so much. And happy to be here. I think when Deus was talking, he talked about Tanzania is the example of peace in the region and all that. And one thing that came into my head is how do we define peace? Because I think what we're just a quiet nation, quiet people, not necessarily that we have peace or we live in a peaceful state. So maybe that's something that we need to unpack when we're talking or selling ourselves as a country, as a peaceful country in the region. And I think when you're looking into the upcoming election, and I'm having trouble to call it election, but for the sake of the conversation, let's just go with that word. I think the credibility issue is going to be one of the key things that is going to be coming up, regardless of the outcome of the 29th October. I think there will be, because what we're seeing silencing of the opposition. We are also seeing silencing of the people, not just the opposition part. We are also seeing silencing of the opposite voice or views, regardless of where they're coming from. So now we only have the ruling party able to speak, not even to question itself, but to only speak. So, for example, if you ask anybody, even in this room, what is the campaign agenda for now? We don't have any. I think we're going to struggle to even know what are we campaigning for, like what is the agenda, because there is none. And because I think what we have, I don't know what we have right now, because, and I think is we have even denied, the people of this country to see people critiquing, but also having a conversation, the sense of humor, having, different opinion. And it's not like when that happens in the previous election that anything changed in terms of an election results. Of course, CCM still won, but at least we had that picture. It's not a picture perfect, but at least we had that opportunity. That has been stripped off when you're looking into this election now. And it's not an election. So when I'm speaking from other groups, for example, women do not feel comfortable. The majority of women do not feel comfortable to participate because I think what we have, the scenario screams fear and intimidation. And if there's any group that understands intimidation, fear, and violence, it's women, because we live it every day. It's young people because they live it every day. And I think that's a picture that that is being painted. And with that picture, I think it screams to the mass, that is not our platform, it's not our space to engage in, but we just have to sit down and be watchers and not actually participate. And, when I was listening to Richard and Deus, and I think there is this also a conversation of reshaping our future. And we also hear that we want to go back. And I remember yesterday I was working with a friend of mine, and we said, if we said we want to go back, we are going back to where?
Yeah.
During Mariam's era of Zidum Fikra za Mwenyekiti, are we going to where? Mwinyi, where everything and everything, you can just bring anything you want? Are we going back to Kikwete, where the winner takes it all? Or are we going back to Magufuli? It's either my way or the highway. So which era are we going back to? And I think Deus touched on it. We have now the young generation that did not live through Mwalimu, Mkapa, Mwinyi, and some of them even Kikwete. So they have a completely perspective of what is peace, what is right, what is justice, and what is election. And we're seeing it redefining it. And I think they're showing us the way of how it should be. And I think the older generation, we are confused because we're very uncomfortable. We are seeing things that we were told you cannot question, you cannot ask for accountability. And the young people are saying, no, we can actually demand, we can actually reshape, we can actually redefine the kind of country that we want. And we're all confused, as the older generation. And I think when you're looking at it after Magufuli's demise, there was some sign of probably something different is going to happen, but we were all wrong. And I think where we are right now, you can't even talk about the point of return, because where are we returning to? So, and I think October 29th, regardless of the outcome, is going to reshape this country, and this country will never be the same again. And I think it is also going to reshape our thinking, our views, and our perspective, regardless of where you stand on what is happening right now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And actually, I think when you point out these things, probably there is no any silver lining. And of course, you reiterate what Deus mentioned earlier on, which is democratic puberty that the country is experiencing. Let me bring in now the regional comparisons. And of course, we see Mozambique's Frelimo shares similarities with Tanzania's CCM, both long-serving ruling parties, which are also facing legitimacy issues. And of course, there's a general trend. The so-called liberation parties of ANC, ZANU-PF have seen some form of declining in vote share. Now you can maybe ask Borges, from your experience in Mozambique, what lessons, if whatsoever, can Tanzania draw out from managing dominant party systems during elections? Last year's elections we saw in Mozambique turned out not so well.
Okay, thank you, Nicodemus, for inviting for this very important seminar, and focusing on Mozambique, trying to make the people interested in Tanzania to understand what is going on. I could start by saying that in Mozambique, you have already lived your future in Tanzania. So Mozambique has already lived the future of what is coming in Tanzania. So I will basically draw this my presentation based in a recent article I published. The title is Rigging by the State Apparatus, Systemic Electoral Fraud in Mozambique Jeopardizes the Credibility of Democracy and Creates Room for Political Violence. And why I think this is important? This is important because when we talk about democracy, we first highlight the role of democratic institutions, right? They are the pillars of a democracy, of a democratic system. And what are we talking about? We're talking about the electoral bodies, so like a National Electoral Commission, depending on the name. I know in Tanzania is independent, in other countries it doesn't include independent, but in principle it must be independent. from the political power, from the executive. Also, we are talking about courts, which are very important because they have the final word to say. We saw in Kenya, for example, we saw in South Africa, Constitutional Council or Constitutional Court, depending how they call it. But we always have key democratic institutions which are pillar to defend democracy. There's no democracy without institution. So what we saw in Mozambique in the last, let me say, 25 years, because Mozambique has been holding democratic elections since 1994, since the end of the Civil War. And just a little bit about that Civil War. That was a civil war for democracy. Because after the independence of Mozambique in 1975, Frelimo, which was created ideologically but also materially in Tanzania, decided to go as part of the Nhamirre ideology for a single part system in Mozambique. The opposition Renamo, which was created by dissenters within Frelimo, they started a civil war. The history says a lot about it. You know that this was an aggression. It was funded by apartheid. It was funded by the minority racist regime in Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe. Anyway, that was mainly Mozambicans fighting with Mozambicans. So that was a civil war with the foreign support, of course, but it was a civil war. And the key demand was election to elect the key leaders. So after 16 years of civil war, Mozambique decided to host multi-party election, creating all liberal democratic institution, courts, free press, association, giving it the sound civil society a room that Mozambique has got until now. And what happened is that Mozambique has got a multi-party system, but it doesn't have multi-party democracy because Frelimo hijacked all the democratic institution and working for Frelimo. So at this moment in Mozambique, most important is to be Frelimo member than to be a Mozambican citizen. So Frelimo is such powerful and important that it controls the state. So the Constitution of Mozambique will say that, no, we have the rule of law, but no, we have a rule of Frelimo. So who decide what must happen in Mozambique? It's not a state institution, it's a Frelimo. And then we have this democratic institution, which are a pillar of democracy, organizing the election. So instead of organizing a free and fair election, they are just organizing a skewed election to legitimize, and this doesn't legitimize, of course, but at least to legitimize the Frelimo's rule again for the next 5 years, another 5 years, another 5 years. So all these democratic institutions which should work to build a democratic election, they're just the exact institution of manipulating the system. And this is what I see in Tanzania. This is what I saw in your report, the situation report, Nicodemus, that you wrote in Tanzania. For example, having the National Election Commission bearing opposition, the mainstream opposition, let's highlight, not all opposition. They still need some opposition, just to justify the multi-party democracy. But the mainstream opposition is buried from running to election. So it happened in Mozambique, and it's happening now in Tanzania. In Mozambique, this is a very fresh thing because it happened in 2024. So the main opposition part, CAD, which is Democratic Alliance, which was supporting the main opposition presidential candidate, Venancio Mondlane, was just buried from running to the election. And who did that? That was the National Electoral Commission. And this is the same thing happening in Tanzania. But most important thing is what are the implications of it? And then I want to build that, what I think is Deus who say that. The young people who absolutely owe nothing to Frelimo, because they did not see Frelimo fighting for independence. They don't even see Frelimo fighting the civil war. This generation was born in the 90s and 2000. These people did not see either war, civil war, or the liberation struggle. So what they want development, they want freedom, they want to elect their own leaders. And what they do after all this rigging by state apparatus, by state institution, they go to the roads, they start violence. I don't know how is the environment in Tanzania, if we have the enabling environment to see this generation Z to do the same, what they did in Mozambique, in Kenya, or are doing right now in Madagascar. However, what I can say is that no one can predict how these people will act, these young people. And above all, they have nothing to lose. They don't have job. They don't have hope, most important. So they
Thank
can
you.
go out to the street and kill and die. And having this heavy-handed response from the security doesn't solve the problem. Instead, it fuels the problem. You kill one and you have 100 more coming out to the streets and banning police station. And the last thing I wanted to say is that I cannot say that Tanzania has been as peaceful as the Tanzanians try to say. Because if we look back to 2015, 2017, what happened in the southern part of Tanzania, the area of Lindi, near Ruvuma area, there was this violent extremism violence, the same that we were facing in northern Mozambique. And if we look into the root causes of this violent extremism and the post-election violence are the same. What are? Political exclusion, economic exclusion, and above all, young people without hope, without perspective. So if you want to see your future, or if one wants to see the future of Tanzania, just look to what happened in Mozambique in the last 2 years. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think you paint a very bleak picture for us and for Tanzania. But now, because of Deus, we'll have to step in in the next 8 minutes. But I want to bring you in, especially you can even respond to what Borges was saying. But again, if you look at the civic space in Tanzania is shrinking. The role of media is also being, it's like a praise and worship. Activists face harassment. But even in the recent few weeks, Deus, we have seen increased state repression, abductions, and forced disappearance of government critics, and an onslaught on the media. One will ask, why is the government so apprehensive, Deus?
Well, I think it's Newton's law all over again. If you've had a state that has been very repressive over a prolonged period with some bathroom break between March 21 and well into 2022 or January 23, and then suddenly has come back on steroids, it is only natural. When the state was much less repressive, we did not see this level of anxiety. So I think this is really a reaction to the state's own action vis-a-vis the citizens. And it is likely to stay that way until such time there has been a thorough national dialogue to agree on the necessary adjustments to be made, the hibernation to be made to return Tanzania on a democratic path. Borges has mentioned that Mozambique has arrived at our future, but I think there will be nuances in the context of Tanzania, because mind you, this is a country that has never experienced civil war. We have seen sporadic violence, particularly in the context of Zanzibar in 2001 after the controversial 2000 elections. We have seen very limited sporadic violence in parts of the mainland Tanzania, and even in 2020, specifically in parts of Mara region and southern Tanzania. That sporadic violence is likely to feature again this time round. Worries continue even on the part of Zanzibar. Certainly, we have seen increased deployment throughout the Isles. But I should also point out, as I said earlier, that we are likely to see new forms of resistance that none of us can predict at the moment because of the ongoing repression. As I said, we are now having to face off with a youthful generation that does not appear to organize in the traditional sense. Even I don't know how this new generation is organizing. I should also point out that as a result of evolving public policy since round about 2013, we've had young people go through national service training, which when I went to school, that had been put to an end. So we had a moment where we didn't have to go through national service before we went to university. But for the last 12 or so years, we've built a whole generation of young people who have been trained in weaponry, and not all of them could have been absorbed in our security establishment. And I wonder where all these young people are. It does concern me. I do think, however, that the rest of us in mainstream civil society have a real opportunity before us. And I think the opportunity lies in the fact that the political class in Tanzania has squandered an opportunity since 2001 to engage in meaningful dialogue. So we've seen seminar after seminar, workshop after workshop, national conference after national conference that has borne very little. In the end, it all climaxed with the enactment of the 3 pieces of law in February 2024, with very little by way of reflecting a national consensus. So it is a moment for us as mainstream civil society or traditional civil society to step up and provide direction, because given how polarized Tanzanian politics is at the moment, I do not see a way among the political class for a breakthrough. That breakthrough will have to come from the rest of us who sometimes pretend to be intellectuals and people who have studied the problems of this country and understand them at depth. This is a moment for us really to prove our value.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Deus. Again, meaningful dialogue, and of course, I would maybe be tempted to ask you how you can be able to do it, because you have given the problem. So I don't know. I'm tempted to ask you how well can the civil society engage before I can give a chance to Mary.
Yeah, I think very quickly, because as I indicated, I need to leave for another meeting. But you see, Tanzania has so much to learn from herself than from many of our neighbors. Civil society has always been a permanent fixture in our political dispensation, democratic dispensation. In the early 90s, churches used to meet in Bagamoyo to set out an agenda for reforms. And the same religious leaders contributed to what was then the National Conference on Constitutional Reforms. So it's not as if we have no precedence. The precedence is there. During President Mkpa's time, some leaders of civil society engaged proactively with the development discourse then through the public expenditure review process. So we have the precedence, and we have something to go back to. I think it just takes us being very intentional about it. But I have no doubt that the civil society in its broad sense, I don't necessarily mean NGOs, have an important role to play in the current state of affairs.
Thank you very much, Deus, and we can actually release you as we continue with the debate and the discussion. Now I bring in Mary. You spoke about earlier on the optimism that came in with President Samia when she came in 2021. And of course, there was also that gender aspect that was also very critical, that she's a woman, and probably a lot was anticipated. And from the way you packaged and the way we are seeing the situation unfolding, not much has been done. What is your assessment of all this, Mary?
Okay, thank you so much. And I think I will start with where Deus ended, with the civil society. And I believe in numbers. And I think one of the questions that comes into my mind is, as civil society organizations, are we even trusted by the public? I think that's a question we need to ask ourselves. Do we still make sense to the public? Because I think every time when something is happening that we have to intervene, we look on the other side. And I think when you're looking now, going back to how now things are being organized, you have people actually running. They're more likely to run to the young people online than to civil society organizations. And I think because when our space was being decreasing, we did not notice it. And I think how also we defined our engagement with the government, we forgot our role as civil society organizations. We defined our engagement with the government in looking for friendship. And I'm not saying we should be enemies of the government, but we forgot our roles and where we can bring different parties to discuss this. Now, back to your question. And I think we are, and I wish I could say something nice or positive, but we're in a very dark space right now. We are full of questions right now. I think everyone that you speak to or you talk to is actually just looking into October 29th. And I think that's where we are all looking at. And I think what we are seeing now, there is fear on our side, but there's also fear, I think, on the state. Because I think at some point the party, the Chama Cha Mapinduzi party, will have to take some accountability. I don't know when or how, but it will have to take some accountability. Because whatever is happening right now, it ends on their shoulders. So they'll have to take some form of accountability. And I think they'll also have to come back, as we're saying, as a nation, we need to come back and have a dialogue. And I think it's really, really important to make sure that as a nation, we need to come back on the table and have a dialogue. We are not late yet. We can still have a dialogue. We can agree to disagree, but we can have a dialogue for the betterment of this country. But I think the most important part that needs to have that dialogue, internal dialogue, and also self-assessment and interrogation is Chama Cha Mapinduzi. Because I think everything that is happening right now, regardless of who is going to do what, everything will still drop at Chama Cha Mapinduzi. But I am seeing, I think now, looking on the brighter side, I think what is happening right now has helped us as people of this country to look into ourselves and they say, we don't have it right. We have it wrong. And it also a place where we say, as a country, we have been actually more hypocritical than being looking into ourselves and then saying there are things that are not working. And the ugly part of it is we have the young people, if you ask me, they're doing what they can. And then we have the older generation that is still pulling them back, using, listening to your elders, respecting. We have also redefined respect into being fear. Like when you're scared, when you cannot ask, then that is a form of respect. So there are some positive signs because we're going after October 29th, as I said before, the country will never be the same. So it is giving us an opportunity to actually look into ourselves as a country and then redefine our future and how it is going to look like. But it's also giving us an opportunity to just look at this country and then say, actually, this country belongs to all of us and not just a few. Because we have created this culture where you have just very few people owning everything in the country, including our voice and our experiences. We are living in a country where even when you're in pain, you're not allowed to say, I am in pain. You are allowed to smile because when you smile, it shows that you're peaceful. But I think now The pain is too much, and I think it's going not just emotional, it's physical. People are feeling it. And I think as much as it's ugly and how scared it is also a good thing because it is going to get us to somewhere where we are going to have a conversation. And that conversation is a must. Now, what is going to lead to that conversation? I don't know. October 29 will determine what type of conversation, who is going to be on the table on that conversation, who is going to lead that conversation, who is going to be central in that conversation. Because for now, everything is just a mess, but it's a mess that is very clear, and we can all see it with our clear eyes. That is a mess that we see it. It's just there in our eyes, and we can define it and we can touch it. And what we see right now is the country is not okay. What is going on right now is not okay. We are destroying this country. We are destroying what we know about this country. It's ugly. I said before, I'm not saying we're a peaceful country. We have never been a peaceful country. We have always been a country that dies quiet, but it's not peace. So, but now, and I think that's something that CCM should be worried about, because now you're pushing people to a place where they're saying, I don't think I have peace. I think something is wrong. And that should not only scare CCM, should scare everyone who loves this country. I am scared because I know whatever is happening. First of all, if anything happens, we don't even have the resources to bring this country back. Let's even go back to that. We have a large part of this country that cannot even afford 3 meals. We have people who cannot afford medical expenses. We have people who cannot even afford a quality education. And now if you top it up with violence, we do not have the resources to bring this country back. And the only thing that we can afford right now, if you ask me, we need to go back to the drawing board. We know where we went wrong. We know where we are. We know what we have to do. We just need to take action and then say, let's have a conversation, a respectful conversation, agree to disagree, but putting the country first and not any individual's interest first.
Thank you very much, Mary. I hope people are listening to this, because this is the essence of actually having this conversation. And you are calling for a national dialogue, a conversation, and in some form of, a consensus where people come and meet and dialogue. But Richard, maybe to bring it to you, at what point do you think that the country will know that actually this is what we need right now, which is a national conversation, a national dialogue? It's not like we have not been having these conversations. As Deus pointed out, you have had these small dialogues which probably have culminated into these electoral laws, which probably are not did not meet the reform agenda. But again, at what point do you believe will be the entry point for this national dialogue, Richard?
Well, I think the most important thing is to, first of all, as as a nation, we need to realize that this is the 21st century. We are not living in the 20th century where these independence parties, Chama Cha Mapinduzi included, and of course many others across Africa, they were legitimized by their history as liberators, and they lived by, using, state apparatuses, because if you revisit the constitutions of these countries, you'd see that it is the president who is chairman of the party, but he appoints, judges, he appoints members of the Electoral Commission, he appoints, heads of security apparatuses, you see. And actually, these are the people who are helping the party to win elections, even if it has lost its legitimacy. It has lost its touch with the common people. Now, I think, first of all, we need to realize that they need to change. And of course, when we talk about, reforms, because you started by saying when President Samia Suluhu Hassan got into power, she advocated for reforms. you remember the 4R, reconciliation, resilience, reforms, and rebuilding. But when we were approaching this year's election, it's like she abandoned the reform agenda. Simply because I'm not sure, maybe she was threatened by, the supporters, the hardliners in the party, that if she reforms, she might, the party might lose the election. So I think what Chama Cha Mapinduzi needs to do is, first of all, to come to its senses and to know that it will not continue to rule, by relying on, using security apparatuses, or by using, a threat to use force, to those who are, opposing the party. So when they realize that, that's now when they can call for, a national dialogue. And of course, now in the campaign trail, they are talking about reconciliation. In the first 100 days, they are going to, start or to initiate a process of reconciliation. And I think if, the right agenda is put into that reconciliation process, it should be to ensure that we have a constitution that, gives equal opportunity of participation to all, including political parties, reforming the role of, some key actors, such as the registrar of political parties. A lot have been said about him, and to my surprise, and we consider judges as custodians of rights, but he is accused as being the one who's actually suppressing opposition parties, instead of, supporting. We need a dialogue that should be centered on 3 areas. First of all, to separate the party from the state, because there is a state party fusion that is causing a lot of trouble to this country. We also need to see internal democracy within Chama Cha Mapinduzi itself improved, because currently, for example, you'd remember, for example, during the nomination of flag bearers for the parliamentary election, in most cases, there was, opinion poll by members of the party. But at the end of the day, actually, people were handpicked. Someone is winning the nomination to show that, he's favored by, the voters, the party members. But at the end of the day, they are not appointed. Someone else is actually picked up. And actually, if you look at the way Chama Cha Mapinduzi nominates a presidential candidate, that's even more worrying. You would expect to see a system like that which is carried out by the parties in the US, whether it is the Republican or the Democratic Party. In Tanzania, like in 2015, for example, you see candidates, going around the country, collecting endorsements. And you actually see maybe this candidate, given the manner in which he is received by the members of the party in those areas, he's probably the right candidate. But at the end of the day, only a committee of a few members, will appoint those who could be presidents, and people with all the potential are left out. So basically, it's the party that is not inclusive, and it's based on patronage or connections. And if you are not connected, that means your chances of becoming a leader or a flag bearer in any election are slim, you see. And finally, these parties, basically the independence parties, they have they have actually been surviving by, offering, lucrative contracts, to maybe, a few businessmen, businesswomen who are now, who are in turn supporting that particular party. That means there are certain contracts that are very difficult for, just a common businessman to get them, you see. So we think that some of the issues that should be touched when we talk about the national dialogue is to ensure that we follow merit, meritocracy as a system in all parts, including, how people are, being appointed, and of course, how, businesses are being run, because businesses are held, hostage by the party. If they can't, live in favor of the party, in most cases, they are being harassed. You know, so I think these are the issues that should be considered.
Thank you very much. I think you bring out the most important things of what should go into this national dialogue, and of course, the separation of the state from the party. Of course, the other irreducible minimum is the constitution. But I really like the point that you bring in, which is it seems more like the state has been captured, and because of this business interest, and again, this is based on issues to do with merit, how people are awarded certain issues. This is something I think the country really needs to have a conversation around. Let me bring in lastly, Borges, when we look at now the role of regional organizations, and how they can play very, very briefly, because we're in the tail end of our discussion, and then we can get in Q&A. Regional organizations such as the African Union, the SADC, the East African Community, of course, they are sending observer missions. But again, how do you draw lessons from what really happened in Mozambique and what Tanzania can really learn in these October elections?
I observed it, but also conducted research on two elections in the region. So in Angola in 2022 and in Mozambique, several elections. So what they have in common is that the regional organization, mainly SADC and the African Union. I won't say much about the East Africa community because I don't know very well how it works. They add nothing, absolutely nothing to a free and fair election. This organization work like a club of comrades. They just come to legitimize the rigging. So look what SADC said about the highly rigged election in Mozambique, and compared to what the EU said and a Commonwealth observer said, or International Republican Institute from the US said. So this organization, people should not expect much from them. They're just club of comrades. If you want to understand that, just look how President like Robert Mugabe, during the time they were just skewing the election, but at the same time he was also leader of SADC. So what can you expect from them? Absolutely nothing. This is so unfortunate to say, but we cannot expect much. They have this guideline, for example, SADC has its guidelines for and principles for democratic election, but the organization itself doesn't implement its own guidelines. So unfortunately, hope should not be there in this organization. In theory, they are important. In practice, their role is just to legitimize the rigging from their comrades elsewhere.
Thank you very much, our panelists. I think we have now set the stage for a Q&A from the audience. I had several questions that were asked from my email, sent to my email, but I'm very happy to take in questions and comments, and probably you want some form of clarifications, which our able panelists will be able to really respond to them. So you can go ahead and raise up your hand. I will select you and mute you, and then you introduce yourself, direct the question to any of our panelists, including myself, and we can be able to proceed. We have Giacomo De La Rosa. Please, you're welcome.
Hi, thank you for your briefing. It was very interesting. I have a question. I think it's better. Can I send it on the chat? maybe it's easier like that, so all the panel can actually read it and respond.
Sure, please.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. But there was a, okay, great. So there is the question that has been asked by Giacomo, which is with the regional trend of Gen Z protests motivated by political rights and social economic difficulties, what are the chances that the no reforms, no election protests turn into larger scale unrest, specifically seen recent examples in Madagascar, where security forces essentially joined the protests, bearing in mind the recent news that various Tanzanian defense forces personnel speaking out against the government. Maybe I can direct that to Mary and then Richard.
Oh, thank you. I think we are in a period where we are also seeing, not just in the region, even beyond the region, what Gen Zs are doing. We have seen what has happened in Nepal, Madagascar. We have also seen what Gen Zs in Kenya have seen. And remember, the way the Gen Zs are organizing, they're no longer using the traditional methods that the older generation are using. They are more comfortable using technology, and they're learning from their colleagues, and they have seen it. And I think if you want to see the test of what might happen, and I hope it doesn't happen, or what might happen, just think of what happened just recently in Kumara and what the people did in Kimara and how quickly the government had to either, take some action. And that is just a test of showing. And I hope that we do not take them like these are just people online that won't be able to do anything. These are the young people. Most of them are unemployed. Most of them have, they are not in school. Or maybe if they're in school, they can even pay their university fees and all that. So we have a generation that is ready to do anything. And that's also one of the other things that we need to know is they are learning tactics. And when I look at the online, it scares me because you have a long campaign of young people who are saying, I know October 29th, I'll be dead, but please do not mourn me. I'm trying to fix the country. So anyone who is serious, you have to take that statement serious. You don't need to say like, oh, if someone wants to commit suicide, they won't tell you. Sometimes they tell you the signs are there. You just need to take action. So I am not taking them for granted. They are learning from the best. And when you're learning from the best, you become the best teacher. We shouldn't take them for granted.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. Richard, I think the other question is on the prospects for peace and security, especially with the supposed the various Tanzania Defense Forces personnel speaking against the government. And of course, we know there are planned protests on the election day. Probably you'll want to speak more about that and the implications.
Yeah, first of all, I think we should know that I think Deus said about this. We don't know who is actually, coordinating. We just see a few actors posting or encouraging demonstrations through social media, particularly Instagram, because Twitter is operational unless you have a VPN in Tanzania. But basically, if you read comments, particularly when anything of national interest has been posted or a statement by a national leader, if you read comments, you see that several young people, the Gen Z that Mary are talking about, are, commenting to show that they will actually go out to demonstrate on 29th October. Now, in my analysis, I think there are several groups of people who could actually participate in the demonstrations. We have Gen Zs, as Mary mentioned, those unemployed, and they believe that maybe their plight is connected to a few people who are, enjoying the national cake, because we see these posts, people showing Rakshalia's cars that are used by, a contingent of few people who are said to enjoy the national cake. But again, we had disciples of a certain Pentecostal church that was closed down by the government because, its leader, a bishop, actually came out to criticize the government issues related to abductions. And these disciples are believed to be very committed if they want to do something. So we believe that they can also join the protest because even their leader hinted about it. But again, there are those who are disgruntled. They participated in an election, but they were, actually they were not given the opportunity, although maybe they won, they led in the opinion poll. Their disciples are also disgruntled and they might take part in the demonstrations. But the main opposition party, CHADEMA, it has said that it is going to, in its agenda of no reforms, no elections, they are probably the likely candidate to take part in the demonstrations as well. So if we can list, the list can be long. Okay, the list can be long. So in terms of the prospect for peace, first of all, if you listen to the pronouncements made by leaders, like starting with the third week of the electoral campaigns, there have been actually threats. And although they are talking about reconciliation, but you don't see a tone of reconciliation coming from there. There have been threats about using force, and the minister responsible, the Minister for Home Affairs has echoed those threats. The police force has echoed threats. So and probably these threats are doing more harm than good, in my opinion, because when these threats are issued, the response of the young people who are actually planning to demonstrate, it's like they are being motivated to demonstrate. So I thought maybe in the remaining 2 weeks, we need to see a tone of reconciliation taking roots. And of course, in my opinion, for example, if I were to advise, I would say there was no need of closing down the Pentecostal church. And I think this should be the first step. Give them their, freedom to worship. And then, if possible, talk to the other actors, talk to CHADEMA, because they are disgruntled, and we don't know what they will do actually coming the election day.
Thank you very much for that. There are several comments. The role of trade union professionals, employers in national dialogue. Richard, I think you can respond to that together with the prospects of a shutdown of internet or even TikTok or over the elections as it has happened in the past. You have spoken a little bit about that. As we make some form of conclusions, I'll begin with Richard, then we move to Mary, then finally to Borges, and then we can conclude. Richard.
All right, thank you. So,
the national dialogue. So this Dak is asking about the role played by trade unions, professionals, and other interest groups.
All right, thank you. Well, I was asked a question like this a few weeks ago. Particularly on how different groups talking about professional organizations, trade unions, maybe academics, civil society organizations. What are they doing with regard to what is happening in the country? I think majority of us are mute, and we are mute because of the current trend, because one of the key features of the current regime is that any dissent is equated to treason. And if you are just being critical to the government, to the administration, to politics, they look at you as someone who is committing treason, and it's like they don't want to be criticized. So that's why these professional organizations, trade unions are mute, and at most you see their leaders actually, aligning with the ruling party, the ruling Chama Cha Mapinduzi. They are either party members, or they support those parties even if they are not. They support the party even if they are not members of the party. So at the end of the day, we are left with young people who are complaining on the internet, and the young people are not guided because we are not doing our part as academics, as civil society organization. I think we discussed about this, as professional organization. So if politics stumbles in Tanzania, and I want to repeat this, if politics stumbles in Tanzania, many of us will be to blame, including these professional organizations, academics, because we have decided to keep quiet. But also there are specific actors who, take a specific blame. So if I'll have more time, I'll probably talk about these specific actors and why are they to be blamed if politics stumbles in Tanzania.
Thank you. Mary, finally, and then we can go to Bosch.
Thank you. I think Richard already spoke on that. First of all, these people have so much to lose. And the state know, and they also know. So I think they're in the, if you can beat them, you join them. And now we have a culture where it shows you the higher the volume of violence, the more seen you are by the state. So even you see them on the campaign trail and what they say, if you give me an opportunity, I will break their legs. If you give me an opportunity, I will do this. So we're just increasing the level. Everybody, I think we're in the competition of how much violence I can bring to these people given an opportunity. And if someone says I'll break their leg, someone will say I'll chop off their head. So I don't see them coming. And I think if you ask me, if you want this country anything to change, they are the last group, including me. We are the last group to be dependent on, because the moment your interests are being touched, you run. And I think that's why when we say we don't know who is organizing this, I think the young people have come to realize we are dealing with grown-ups who are actually the main problem. We don't want to involve them, because the moment we involve them, we're going to be putting ourselves at risk. And also, I think someone there, I saw on the question, they were talking about national dialogue. There's no national dialogue. So for national dialogue is not even allowed to start with. You cannot, because it's not even allowed. So there's nothing like national dialogue right now, if we have to be honest with ourselves. I think what we have now, we have different groups that are addressing what is happening. And then we have another group, and I would say maybe the state that is supposed to listen, because the only person who do not want to come on the table, if we have to be honest, is the state. I think people have shown on different platforms have shown interest to have that conversation, but somehow, somewhere, the state is just saying we don't have this nation, we don't want to have that conversation. So until the state is ready, and that's why I'm saying Richard was talking about the promise of 100 days, and then we are going to bring the conciliation. Why do you need to do it after? It's like beating somebody and then saying now let's talk. Why not have a conversation before you beat somebody? So you can see there is no political will to have these conversations. And I want to pretend like I don't know why, but I know why. And I think maybe we need to get into that dark space where we are, that place where we are, probably for things to change. But I really, really hope that you can just wake up one, because we still have time. 2 weeks is too many. We still have so much time to just say, forget this. Let's have a conversation. Let's talk. But for some reason, we have just refused to get into that moment. But if you're asking me, I think people are going to bring some senses into this. I would say the young people, the groups that Richard mentioned, the people who are actually poor, but definitely not the professionals, definitely not the academicians, definitely zero, zero, zero elite. Elites, these people, elites should be in another group. Those ones, they will tell you before you finish the sentence, my mother. So those ones, no. So I think it's only different group of people. And I think will be the group that has not been raised with the same kind of messages that our generation growing up were raised with. And thus it will be, I think for us, will be maybe the last resort, regardless of what happens. I think those are some of the people or the groups that we think will come to help this nation, if there's anything like help.
Thank you so much.
And
yeah.
by the way, on the turning off the social media, the TikTok and all that, I think we all know they're going to be turned off. We are so ready. Like even the young people knows that it's going to be turned off. And I want to believe that the more, because actually even turning them off makes the young people even more angrier, because that's the only means of communication. That's the only thing they understand. So you also, even turning them off is not even going to be favoring the state. Is actually you're adding more and more groups to march on, on the streets. Thank you.
Thank you very much, dear panelists, and for those wonderful insights. And Mary, you make a very fantastic conclusion. So I want to take this opportunity because of time. We are 6 minutes after what we had planned. I really want to thank all the entire panelists, Mary Ndaro, Deus, Valentine, Richard Mbunda, and our colleague at the ISS, Borges Nhamirre, who brought in insights from Mozambique. And of course, to all participants for engaging in this, I think, very timely conversation. And of course, this is an opportunity for us to really engage, discuss, and of course, talk around the issues that are really affecting the country, because of course, it will have regional implications. So today's discussion really pointed to Tanzania's elections, not just merely about Tanzania, but it also really reflects the broader democratic challenges across the region and Africa as a whole. I want to sincerely thank you, and of course, you can be able to really check ISS's work, including the policy brief that we have actually worked on. You can find the link there shared. It will help you to really understand most of the things that we have done. I've also done a piece around whether these election observations will be the last line of defense. You're most welcome to also visit our website, issafrica.org, to engage in most of our work across the region. Thank you, and have yourselves a wonderful evening ahead.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having us.